Leading off our show, Democratic Congressman Chris Pappas of New Hampshire. Congressman, we've been waiting for so many of these decisions. I think specifically around TPS, this is a ruling that is targeted around Haitians and Syrians. But I think that you and I and others in Congress know that it could apply to so many other tens of thousands of people here under that temporary protected status. So just initially from the bat, your reaction to these rulings from the court.
Well, maybe some court watchers might be surprised, but if you really know this court, they're a conservative activist court. They've continued to give Donald Trump more powers. No one should be surprised by these rulings. The fact is, we've got work to do in Congress to make sure we have sensible immigration laws that ensure that they're consistent with our values here in the United States. The ruling about temporary protected status not only impacts Haitians and Syrians, but it has implications for people from Ukraine and Nepal and Venezuela and others that are here legally in the United States under temporary protected status. These are folks who are part of our communities, who are working, who came here legally. And I think it's up to Congress to figure out how we can come together on a bipartisan basis and ensure that we're providing common sense extensions. We did that with respect to Haitians in the House. We had a discharge petition that got to the floor based on bipartisan signatures. We passed it with a majority vote in the House. It's waiting over in the Senate, would provide for an 18-month extension for the approximately 350,000 Haitians that are here legally in the United States. Again, the situation in Haiti is incredibly dangerous. It's probably worse than when many of these people came to the United States in the first place. They're run by, it's run by gangs. There's widespread hunger. And so the United States needs to be smart about how we address the root causes of migration, how we ensure that there is a safe country for these individuals ultimately to return home to. But this is not the time to put people who are here legally in jeopardy by forcing them to return to Haiti. Let's continue to work on this issue in Congress and find a solution.
And I think in this specific Congress, we saw that even bipartisan actions, when taken, can be thwarted by the president. I mean, that was one of the key storylines of this week, the way he torpedoed what would have been a celebrated signing of a housing bill because he continues to harp on the need for the Save America Act, which does not have the votes to pass the Senate. But we'll leave that to the side for right now because the court still has other key decisions that it wants to and needs to decide on. Specifically, I'm looking at something like birthright citizenship, and I wonder the conversations that you and your colleagues were having, seeing these rulings come down as wins in the immigration space for the Trump administration, and what you are wondering or preparing for on something as landmark and fundamental as that. All of these are huge decisions, but that speaks to a fundamental right that has existed since the Civil War in this country.
Well, look, if you believe in the plain language of the Constitution, that should be a very clear-cut decision on birthright citizenship. But I don't think you would put anything past this court or this administration. And so people are watching it anxiously. I think this is a moment where we have to be doing the work in the people's house on these major issues and not just allowing the court and the administration to be driving the train. So whether that issue is immigration, whether it's housing, where we did our job and passed a bipartisan bill with overwhelming support, we've got to be responding to the short and long-term needs of this country and figuring out how we have a system of co-equal branches of government that can actually deliver for our citizens.
There was another court case decided yesterday that I want to get into a little bit. The conservative majority also struck down a Hawaii law that requires people to get permission before carrying guns onto privately owned property like stores, gas stations, or hotels. This marks another win for the Trump administration and Republicans who've argued the law violates the Second Amendment. Hawaii had argued the measure ensured that private owners could decide whether they wanted firearms on their property. So again, this is part of the broader fight over the Second Amendment. What did you make of this decision, and how are you metabolizing what we've seen?
Well, look, I'm not familiar with the specifics of the Hawaii law, but there are a number of things that we're working to pass in Congress that we could pass if we see the majorities flip in November that are common sense in nature, that speak to public safety and how we protect people's lives, and that I think are also consistent with the Second Amendment. Now, we'll see how a future court would interpret something like that, but the American people support things like universal background checks and efforts to keep dangerous weapons out of the wrong hands. And so I think we got to be continuing to act in the best interests of our country in terms of public safety and focused on how we can support our communities. And I think you can do that in a way that doesn't infringe on people's right to bear arms.
I think it's also important to note that as we are talking about the decisions that came down yesterday, we are speaking on the day of another important decision, which is the decision to grant the right to same-sex marriage. If you were elected in the Senate bid that you are currently in the process of running for, you would become the first out gay man in the U.S. Senate. And I wonder if you can just talk about the space that you might be holding as you see the decisions from yesterday, but then also the legacy of a court that has granted rights like this that make this country more inclusive, that give people more rights and more access.
Well, look, the story of America on the 250th anniversary of our independence is about how generation after generation, more people have come into the fold, have been extended the same rights and responsibilities that we all deserve. And it was 11 years ago that the Obergefell decision was handed down. I got married 3 years ago because of that decision, and I had a friend who read an excerpt from Justice Kennedy's decision in that case. And, you know, I think it's pretty remarkable the way we can make progress in America, the way that this continues to be a country of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, as was written in the Declaration of Independence. And our test is to ensure that more people can live up to their truth, can be full citizens of the United States. We are better off as a society when that happens. And so part of what we're facing here this November is ensuring that we've got a court that is consistent with the values that we hold dear and the opportunities we have for the future. And so I would urge people, go to chrispappas.org, join our campaign for Senate. Help us take back the levers of power for the people of this great country to ensure that we can make progress, that decision isn't the end of the line, that it's one in a long line of decisions that speak to the decency of the American people and our desire for freedom.
Can I just ask, because we've been focused on the building across the street from Congress, of course, the Supreme Court, but if we take it back to Congress itself, can you just describe what it has felt like the last few days as you were part of the group that voted for this bipartisan housing bill? It is rare to see anything bipartisan, certainly not in the numbers that we saw over the course of the last few weeks around this bill. And then as the stage is set for it to be signed, you have the president completely torpedo it. And we talk about what that looks like for Republicans who must have been eager to run on this legislation. But this is also a midterm message for Democrats. And I wonder what it felt like to just see it completely thrown up in the air like that and what the experience has been on the floor. It seems pretty chaotic.
Well, look, this is an example of the complete incompetence of the administration, and I would also say the leadership in the House that is really just carrying the water for Donald Trump on any given day. The fact is this was monumental. This bill doesn't do everything, but there are some significant provisions here that would prevent Wall Street from jacking up home prices, would focus on supporting communities that are building more housing, make it easier to get projects done. And the president blew it up. And I think he's been pretty consistent that he doesn't care about affordability. He's not concerned about housing or Americans' financial situations. And when you're coming from that perspective, you know, this housing bill is just another political bargaining chip to get what you want to advance your own extreme agenda. And for Donald Trump, that's seeing how he can put his thumb on the scale and rig the next election. So it, I think, is incredibly eye-opening, frustrating. Now Mike Johnson has communicated that bill, apparently, to the White House. So the 10-day clock, I think, is running. So we'll see if he signs it, if it becomes law, if he vetoes it. Who knows? We'll be watching it. But this is a central issue in terms of the affordability challenges that we face in this country. We've got to get something major done on housing.
And it seems like Congress, at least, put forward the effort into doing that. We're going to see as that 10-day clock begins, because you're right, the Speaker said he did communicate that bill to the White House. We'll see what the timeline actually brings us. For now, Democratic Congressman Chris Pappas of New Hampshire, great to see you. Thanks for holding down the fort in D.C. See you soon.
Thanks, Allie. Take care.